Wyoming Territory, 1875. The last light of day surrendered to the encroaching dusk as Isaiah Porter guided his horse through the rolling hills toward home. At 26, he'd already claimed 160 acres under the Homestead Act, built a modest but sturdy ranch house, and assembled a respectable herd of cattle. By frontier standards, he'd accomplished what many men twice his age could only dream of achieving. Yet as the silhouette of his ranch emerged on the horizon, the familiar emptiness settled in his chest. "Another day, another dollar, Samson," he said to the sorrel gelding beneath him. The horse's ears flickered back at the sound of his voice, the only companion who'd heard it today. The wind picked up, carrying the promise of rain and the faint howl of distant wolves. Isaiah adjusted his hat, his gaze sweeping across the untamed landscape. He'd chosen this life, isolation for safety's sake. After watching his parents' tender marriage end in grief when outlaws raided their homestead back in Kansas, he'd made a promise to himself. The frontier was no place for love, only survival. Better to be alone than to watch someone you care for suffer. His ranch hands had ridden to town 3 days ago for supplies and likely wouldn't return until tomorrow, leaving the ranch quiet save for the lowing cattle and the creaking windmill that needed fixing. As he approached the weathered barn, the first raindrops began to fall, pattering against his leather vest. "Let's get you settled, boy," Isaiah murmured, dismounting with practiced ease. His boots hit the hard-packed earth with a thud that echoed in the empty yard. This was his kingdom, a solitary domain carved from wilderness through sweat and determination. He'd convinced himself it was enough. The barn door groaned as he pushed it open, leading Samson inside. The familiar sense of hay, leather, and horse greeted him, along with something unexpected, the faintest trace of lavender. Isaiah froze. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he scanned the shadowy interior. "Who's there?" he called out, voice firm despite the sudden pounding of his heart. When no answer came, he carefully lit the lantern hanging by the door. Golden light spilled across the barn floor, revealing nothing amiss at first glance. Samson nickered softly as Isaiah led him to his stall, still alert to every sound. He removed the saddle and brushed down the horse with practiced efficiency, all while keeping his senses attuned to his surroundings. A soft rustle from the hayloft above made him pause. In one fluid motion, he drew his revolver and aimed it upward. "I know you're up there. Come down slow with your hands where I can see them." Another rustle, then a hesitant voice, distinctly female. "Please don't shoot." A face appeared at the edge of the loft, framed by waves of dark brown hair that tumbled past slender shoulders. Wide eyes the color of summer sage stared down at him, filled with equal parts fear and defiance. "I said come down," Isaiah repeated, not lowering his weapon. The young woman descended the ladder with careful movements, her simple blue calico dress torn at the hem and smudged with dirt. When she reached the floor, she lifted her chin despite the revolver pointed at her chest. "I'm sorry for trespassing," she said, her voice steadier than her trembling hands suggested. "I only needed shelter from the storm." Isaiah narrowed his eyes. "There wasn't any storm when you got here." "No, but there was yesterday," she replied, "when 3 men were chasing me." The statement hung between them like gunsmoke, heavy with implications. Isaiah studied her more closely. Despite the dirt and exhaustion evident on her face, he could see she was beautiful, probably around 20 years old. But more importantly, she was terrified beneath her brave facade. "You're running from something," he stated rather than asked. She nodded once, brown curls bouncing with the movement. "Someone. My name is Tessa Dalton. I was traveling with the Millerton wagon train until 2 days ago. My uncle." Her voice caught. "He sold me to a man 3 times my age who already buried 2 wives." Isaiah lowered his gun slightly, but didn't holster it. Stories like hers weren't uncommon in the territories. Desperate guardians, arranged marriages, women treated as property. But trusting strangers got people killed out west. "How do I know you're not bait for a robbery?" he asked, gesturing toward the door with his free hand. "Gang waiting outside." A flash of anger crossed her face. "You don't. But if I were, would I have hidden in your hayloft for a full day without food instead of unlocking your door in the night?" She extended her arms, revealing wrists rubbed raw. "These aren't from your rope, sir. I cut myself free before I ran." The rain outside intensified, drumming against the barn roof. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face in harsh white light for an instant. No deceit lived in those eyes, only desperation. Isaiah slowly holstered his weapon. You can stay the night. In the house, not the barn. Tomorrow I'll take you to town. Sheriff Hewitt's a fair man. He'll help sort this out. Relief washed over her features, softening the wariness that had aged her beyond her years. Thank you. As Isaiah led her through the rain toward his house, he told himself this was nothing more than frontier courtesy, the same he'd extend to any traveler in need. But the voice in the back of his mind whispered that he'd just invited trouble across his threshold in the form of a beautiful woman with eyes that reminded him of his mother's prized sage garden. Thunder rolled across the plains as they reached the porch, nature's warning that Isaiah Porter's carefully constructed solitary existence was about to be upended in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Tessa Dalton sat stiffly at Isaiah's kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The lamplight cast a warm glow over the simple but tidy ranch house, a far cry from the elaborate Philadelphia home she'd left behind 6 months ago to join her only living relative out west. Her uncle had promised opportunity and a fresh start. Instead, he'd traded her to cover gambling debts. Drink, Isaiah encouraged, setting a plate of beans and biscuits before her. You look half-starved. She didn't need to be told twice. Tessa ate with restrained hunger, conscious of his gaze upon her. He was handsome in a rugged way, tall and broad-shouldered from ranch work, with dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of whiskey. His face was clean-shaven save for light stubble that suggested he'd been away from home for days. These men who were after you, he said, leaning against the counter with his own coffee. Would they know to look for you here? Tessa shook her head. I don't think so. I ran through the creek for nearly a mile to hide my trail, like I read in those dime novels. A flush crept up her neck at the admission. I just kept moving until I saw your barn. Isaiah's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, perhaps respect. Smart thinking. Still, we should be cautious. Morning comes, we'll head to town. And then what? Tessa asked quietly. The question that had haunted her since fleeing hung heavy between them. Where could a woman with no family, no money, and men hunting her possibly go? Isaiah looked away, his jaw tightening. That's for you to figure out, Miss Dalton. The sheriff can arrange safe passage east, perhaps. East, she repeated, the word tasting bitter. Back to a society that saw me as nothing but a burden after my parents died. No thank you. The frontier's no place for a woman alone, Isaiah said, his tone matter of fact. Anger flared in Tessa's chest. And yet here I am, still breathing despite what men keep telling me is impossible. She set down her fork with more force than intended. I apologize. You've shown me kindness when you could have turned me away. It's just, you're tired of being told what you can't do. He finished for her, surprising her with his insight. Their eyes met across the table, understanding passing between them like a current. For a moment, neither spoke. A loud clap of thunder broke the silence, making Tessa jump. Isaiah straightened from the counter. You can take my bed. I'll sleep out here, he said, gesturing to a worn armchair near the fireplace. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, he interrupted firmly. You've spent enough nights on hard surfaces. His expression softened slightly. There are clean clothes in the chest. They belong to my sister. She was about your size. Tessa blinked in surprise. You have a sister? A shadow crossed his face. Had. He didn't elaborate further, and Tessa didn't press. Everyone carried ghosts out west. Later, lying in Isaiah's bed surrounded by the unfamiliar scent of sage and leather, Tessa stared at the ceiling. The rain continued its steady assault on the roof, but for the first time in days, she felt safe. The feeling was as dangerous as it was comforting. In the main room, Isaiah sat in the chair, listening to the rain and wondering what madness had possessed him to bring a fugitive woman into his home. If her pursuers found her here, it could mean trouble for his ranch, trouble he'd spent years avoiding by keeping to himself. Yet something about her determination struck a chord within him. Neither of them slept well that night. Both aware that morning would force decisions neither was prepared to make. Dawn broke misty and golden over the Wyoming plains. Isaiah had risen before first light, completing his chores with the efficiency of a man who'd done them 1,000 times before. When he returned to the house, He found Tessa dressed in his sister's old riding skirt and blouse, her hair neatly braided down her back. The clothes transformed her from a frightened fugitive to a proper frontier woman. They fit well, she said, smoothing the fabric. Your sister had fine taste. Isaiah nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Caroline always said a woman should dress practically, but never forget her dignity. He cleared his throat. There's coffee. As they sat eating a simple breakfast of biscuits and bacon, a distant sound made Isaiah tense. He rose swiftly, moving to the window with practiced stealth. Riders, he said quietly. 3 of them, coming from the east. Tessa's face drained of color. That's them. That has to be them. Her hands trembled as she set down her cup. I should run. I can't bring this trouble to your door after your kindness. Isaiah's mind raced. The law would say to turn her over. A woman was her guardian's property in many ways, especially if money had changed hands. But everything in him rebelled against that notion. The root cellar, he said suddenly. Under the kitchen. Go now and stay quiet. She hesitated only briefly before disappearing through the trapdoor he revealed beneath the rug. Isaiah replaced it carefully, then grabbed his rifle from above the door, loading it with calm precision born of frontier necessity. The riders approached slowly, their horses' hooves squelching in the mud from the previous night's rain. Isaiah stepped onto his porch, rifle held casually but visibly across his body. 3 men dressed in dusty trail clothes regarded him with open suspicion. Morning, Isaiah called out, his voice even. Can I help you, gentlemen? The leader, a stocky man with a graying beard and cold eyes, urged his horse forward. Looking for a girl. Pretty little thing, brown hair, blue dress. Run away from her rightful husband. His hand rested too casually near his holstered pistol. Seen anyone like that? Isaiah leaned against the porch post, affecting a relaxed posture that belied his readiness. Can't say that I have. Been out with the herd these past few days. Just got back yesterday evening. The second rider, younger and sharp-eyed, pointed toward the clothesline. Those look like women's things hanging there. Isaiah didn't flinch. My sister's. She passed last winter. Typhoid. I haven't had the heart to get rid of her things. The lie came easily, woven with enough truth to sound convincing. The leader studied Isaiah's face, clearly weighing whether to believe him. Mind if we take a look around? Girl's worth a fair sum to her husband-to-be. Actually, I do mind, Isaiah replied, straightening. This is my property, bought and paid for. I've got no girl here, and you've got no right to search. The third rider, who had remained silent until now, spat tobacco juice onto the ground. Mighty protective of your privacy, Cowboy. Makes a man wonder what you're hiding. Tension crackled between them like the electricity before a storm. Isaiah's finger rested lightly near his rifle's trigger, but he kept his voice calm. Nothing to hide, gentlemen. Just a man who values what's his. He paused deliberately. Sheriff Hewitt down in Cottonwood feels the same way about the law. Might be worth mentioning I'm due to meet him today about some strays. Another careful fabrication, but effective. The mention of the sheriff gave the men pause. The leader scowled but eventually nodded. We'll be moving on, then. But keep an eye out for that girl. She's stolen property, plain and simple. If I see any stolen property, I'll be sure to report it to the sheriff, Isaiah replied, his tone making it clear what he thought of their claim. The men wheeled their horses around, but the leader turned back with one final comment. Name's Burrows. Jasper Burrows. I'll remember your face, Cowboy. Isaiah stood motionless on the porch until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he return inside, his heart hammering despite his outward calm. He lifted the trapdoor to find Tessa huddled in the corner of the cellar, her face pale in the dim light. They're gone, he said, extending his hand to help her up. For now. Her fingers were cold in his as she emerged from hiding. You lied for me. Why? You could have been shot. Her eyes searched his, confusion evident. Isaiah released her hand quickly, uncomfortable with both the question and the warmth that spread through him at her touch. No man has the right to buy and sell another human being. Not anymore. Even a woman, she asked softly. Especially a woman, he replied, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. Tessa studied his face, something like hope kindling in her eyes. What happens now? They'll be watching the roads to town. Isaiah turned away, running a hand through his hair as he contemplated their limited options. The sensible course would be to find a way to get her safely to town despite the risk. But a plan was forming in his mind, one that defied the careful isolation he'd built his life around. "You can stay," he heard himself say, "until we figure something else out. I've got hands coming back today. Safety in numbers." Tessa's eyes widened. "You would do that for a stranger?" Isaiah couldn't explain his reasoning, not even to himself. Perhaps it was the memory of his sister's face when she'd asked why they couldn't stop the men who killed their parents. Perhaps it was simply that helping Tessa felt like the first truly important thing he'd done in years. "You said you didn't want to go east," he said finally, "and I could use help around here. The ranch hands are good men, but none of them can cook worth a damn." A smile broke across her face, transforming her features from pretty to breathtaking. "I make excellent biscuits, and I learn quickly." Isaiah found himself returning her smile, the gesture feeling foreign on his face. "Then we have an arrangement, Miss Dalton. Temporary, mind you." "Temporary," she agreed, though something in her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely convinced of that limitation. Neither was he. The days stretched into weeks as spring bloomed across the Wyoming landscape. Isaiah's ranch hands, two brothers named Samuel and Joseph Wilson, and an older man everyone called Doc despite his lack of medical training, had accepted Tessa's presence with minimal questions. To them, she was a distant relative staying for the season, a story that became easier to believe as she transformed from frightened fugitive to capable ranch woman. Tessa proved her worth in ways that surprised even her. She not only cooked meals that made the men groan with appreciation, but also learned to mend tack, tend the kitchen garden, and even help with the calving when one of the heifers struggled one stormy night. Isaiah found himself watching her more often than he cared to admit. The way she hummed softly while kneading bread, how she'd stand on the porch in the evenings with her face turned toward the sunset, the determined set of her jaw when faced with a difficult task. She brought life to spaces that had been merely functional before. One afternoon in late May, Isaiah returned from checking the north pasture to find Tessa sitting on the porch steps, mending one of his shirts. She looked up as he approached, shading her eyes against the sun. "Your timing is perfect," she called out. "I was just about to ring the dinner bell." Isaiah dismounted, leading his horse toward the barn. "Smells good. What are we having?" "Venison stew. Doc brought down a deer yesterday while you were out." She stood, shaking out the shirt. "And I found berries by the creek. Made a cobbler." He paused, looking back at her. Something about the domestic scene, Tessa on his porch with his mended shirt in her hands, the promise of berry cobbler, created an ache in his chest he couldn't name. "Isaiah." She tilted her head, concern crossing her features. "Is everything all right?" He nodded quickly, continuing toward the barn. "Fine. Just hungry, I guess." Later, after a meal that had the ranch hands practically licking their plates, Isaiah sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The screen door creaked as Tessa joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him before settling on the step below, her skirts spread around her. "I received a letter today," she said quietly, "from a friend in the wagon train. Samuel brought it from town." Isaiah stiffened. "News of Burroughs?" "No," she replied, relief evident in her voice. "But my uncle died. Apparently, he drank himself into an early grave after losing at cards again." She stared into her coffee. "I should feel something, I suppose. He was my only family. But all I feel is free." Isaiah studied her profile in the fading light. "Does this mean you'll be moving on?" The question cost him more than he expected. Tessa turned to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he answered too quickly, then cleared his throat. "I mean, you've proven useful around here. The men would riot if they had to go back to my cooking." A small smile played at her lips. "Just the men?" Isaiah looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "You know you're welcome here, Tessa. For as long as you want to stay." She was quiet for a long moment. "Why did you really help me that day?" The truth. The question hung between them, demanding an honesty Isaiah wasn't sure he was ready to give. But Tessa's steady gaze wouldn't allow evasion. "My parents were killed by men who wanted our land," he said finally, the words coming slowly. "My sister and I watched it happen. We were hidden in the root cellar, much like where you hid." He took a deep breath. "When I saw you, afraid but refusing to give in, it reminded me of Caroline. She fought until the end." "What happened to her?" Tessa asked gently. "Typhoid, like I told those men." 3 years ago, we came out here to start over, and then I lost her too. Isaiah set his coffee aside. After that, I decided it was better to be alone. Safer. The frontier takes everything eventually. Tessa's hand came to rest lightly on his knee. Not everything, Isaiah. Not if we don't let it. He looked down at her hand, small and work-roughened now from ranch life. Before he could respond, a shout from the bunkhouse broke the moment. Doc emerged, waving urgently. "Riders coming in fast from the south," he called. Armed, Isaiah was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. "Get inside," he ordered Tessa, all tenderness gone from his voice. She hesitated only briefly before obeying, disappearing into the house as Isaiah and his men prepared to face whatever threat approached through the gathering darkness. 5 riders appeared at the edge of his property, their horses lathered from hard riding. Isaiah recognized the lead figure instantly, Sheriff Hewitt from Cottonwood, his badge catching the last light of day. "Porter," the sheriff called as they drew closer. "Need to talk to you." Isaiah lowered his rifle slightly, but remained cautious. "Kind of late for a social call, Sheriff." Hewitt dismounted heavily, his weathered face grim beneath his mustache. "It's not social. Jasper Burrows is gathering men. Says you're harboring his property, a woman who's rightfully his by contract with her guardian." Isaiah's blood ran cold. "And what do you think about that claim, Sheriff?" "I think a man can't own another person in this country anymore," Hewitt replied, surprising Isaiah. "But Burrows has 15 men with him, all armed and liquored up. They're planning to ride here at first light." Isaiah exchanged glances with his ranch hands, who had moved to stand beside him. "Appreciate the warning. Why give it?" "Because my badge says to uphold the law, not Burrows' twisted version of it." Hewitt sighed heavily. "But I'm one man with 2 deputies. I can't stop them all if they decide to burn you out." The implications hung in the air like gunsmoke. Before Isaiah could respond, the front door opened, and Tessa stepped onto the porch. Her face was pale but determined in the lantern light. "Then we'll stop them ourselves," she said firmly. The sheriff studied her with open curiosity. "You must be the woman worth 15 armed men." "No man decides my worth but me," Tessa replied, her chin lifting. "And I'm not property to be claimed." A smile tugged at Hewitt's mustache. "No, ma'am, I can see that you're not." He turned back to Isaiah. "You've got good men here, Porter, but 5 against 15 ain't odds I'd wager on." Isaiah felt Tessa move to stand beside him, her presence both complicating everything and somehow making the path forward clearer. "We'll be ready," Isaiah said, decision crystallizing within him. This land, this home, it was worth fighting for. And so was the woman beside him, though he hadn't yet found the courage to tell her so. As the sheriff and his men rode away with promises to return before dawn, Isaiah turned to Tessa. "You should leave while you can. Head west into the mountains until this blows over." Anger flashed in her eyes. "I will not run again. This is my home too now, and I'll defend it alongside you." "This isn't your fight," he insisted. "It became my fight the moment you lied to protect me," she countered. "I won't be the reason you lose everything you've built." Isaiah wanted to argue further, but the fierce determination in her eyes stopped him. In that moment, he realized that somewhere between finding her in his barn and standing with her against approaching danger, Tessa Dalton had become essential to him in ways he'd never anticipated. "If you're staying," he said finally, "then you'd better know how to use this." He handed her a revolver from his belt. "And I need to know something first." He hesitated, then asked the question that had been haunting him. "If we survive tomorrow, what then? Will you stay? Not just because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to." Tessa's fingers closed around the weapon, but her eyes never left his face. "Ask me again after we win," she said softly. "Because we will win, Isaiah. Together." As they turned to prepare for the coming battle, Isaiah found himself believing her. For the first time since losing his family, he had someone, worth fighting for. The realization terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Dawn painted the eastern sky with streaks of crimson as Isaiah positioned his men around the ranch. They'd worked through the night, fortifying what they could and planning their defense. Sheriff Hewitt had returned with his deputies an hour earlier, bringing the defending force to 8 against Burrows' 15. Tessa had refused to hide in the cellar, instead insisting on helping. Now she moved among the men, distributing ammunition and coffee with steady hands. When she reached Isaiah at his position behind the water trough, their fingers brushed, lingering longer than necessary. "Almost time," he said quietly. Tessa nodded, her face resolute. "I want you to know something. Whatever happens today, these past weeks have been the first time I've felt like I belonged somewhere since my parents died." Isaiah's throat tightened. "Tessa." She shook her head, cutting him off. "Let me finish. You built this place with your hands, made something beautiful out of wilderness. I understand now why you want to protect it so fiercely." Her eyes held his. "But a home isn't just walls and land, Isaiah. It's people who stand together against whatever comes." Before he could respond, Doc's low whistle alerted them. In the distance, a cloud of dust signaled approaching riders. "Get to the house," Isaiah urged, but Tessa only stepped behind the trough beside him, the revolver steady in her grip. "I told you. Together." There was no time to argue. Burroughs and his men approached in a loose formation, spreading out as they neared the ranch. Isaiah recognized the strategy. They planned to surround the house, cut off any escape. Sheriff Hewitt stepped into the yard, his badge prominently displayed. "That's far enough, Burroughs," he called out. "This is official business now. Turn back, and we can all walk away." Jasper Burroughs reined his horse to a stop, his face contorted with rage. "This ain't your business, Sheriff. That man's hiding what's legally mine." His eyes scanned the property. "Where is she, Porter? Send her out, and maybe we won't burn this place to the ground." Isaiah stood, rifle aimed carefully. "There's nothing here that belongs to you, Burroughs. The sheriff's right. Ride away while you can." Burroughs' laughter was ugly. "You willing to die for a woman you barely know, cowboy? Because that's what's coming." "Nobody needs to die today," Isaiah replied evenly. "But I'll tell you what I told your men weeks ago. I value what's mine." His gaze flicked briefly to Tessa beside him. "And I protect what I value." The statement hung in the air for a breathless moment. Then Burroughs drew his pistol, and the world erupted into chaos. Gunfire cracked across the ranch yard as men dove for cover. Isaiah pulled Tessa lower behind the trough as bullets splintered wood around them. The sheriff and his deputies returned fire, downing 2 of Burroughs' men in the first exchange. "Stay down," Isaiah ordered, rising just enough to get a clean shot at a man attempting to circle behind the barn. The shot found its mark, and the would-be flanker fell from his horse. Beside him, Tessa flinched at each report but kept her gaze fixed on the approaching riders. 3 trying for the house," she warned, pointing to where men had dismounted and were using a wagon for cover as they advanced. Isaiah whistled sharply, alerting Samuel, who was positioned at the upstairs window. Shots rang out, driving the men back. For 10 minutes, the battle raged across the ranch yard. The air grew thick with gunsmoke, the sound of shots punctuated by shouts and the frightened whinnying of horses. Isaiah's ears rang from the constant barrage, but he maintained his position, each shot deliberate and conserving ammunition. Then a cry from the barn drew his attention. Joseph was down, clutching his leg as blood seeped between his fingers. In the moment Isaiah's attention shifted, Burroughs himself made a dash toward the water trough, pistol raised. "Isaiah." Tessa's warning came with the crack of her revolver. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to make Burroughs stumble. Isaiah swung his rifle around, but too late. Burroughs had closed the distance and launched himself over the trough, crashing into them both. Isaiah's rifle skittered away as he grappled with the larger man. Burroughs was fueled by rage and whiskey, his fists connecting with bruising force. They rolled in the dirt, each fighting for advantage as the battle continued around them. "She's mine," Burroughs snarled, landing a blow to Isaiah's ribs that made him gasp. "I paid good money. She belongs to herself," Isaiah growled back, driving his knee upward and shoving Burroughs off. He scrambled to his feet, tasting blood where his lip had split. Burroughs recovered quickly, drawing a wicked hunting knife from his boot. He lunged forward, the blade slashing dangerously close to Isaiah's stomach. Isaiah leapt backward, searching desperately for a weapon. A gunshot cracked, and Burroughs staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as blood blossomed on his shoulder. Tessa stood firm, the revolver still smoking in her hands. "I am not property," she said, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. Burroughs roared with fury, turning toward her with his knife raised. Isaiah didn't think. He simply moved, tackling the larger man with all his strength. They crashed to the ground, and Isaiah felt a searing pain as the knife found his side. But adrenaline kept him fighting, his fist connecting with Burrow's jaw once, twice, until the man went limp beneath him. Only then did Isaiah become aware that the gunfire had ceased. Sheriff Hewitt stood over them, his own revolver trained on Burrow's unconscious form. "It's over, Porter," the sheriff said, kicking away Burrow's knife. "His men are either down or running." Isaiah rolled to his side, clutching at the wound below his ribs. Tessa was beside him instantly, pressing her hands over his to stem the bleeding. "How bad?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Not too deep," she assessed, though fear laced her voice. "But you'll need stitches." As the sheriff's deputies rounded up the surviving attackers, Doc hurried over to examine Isaiah's wound. "She's right," he confirmed after a quick look. "Missed anything vital? You're lucky, boy." Isaiah looked up at Tessa, her face smudged with dirt and gunpowder, her hands red with his blood. "Not luck," he said softly. "Something better." The battle for the ranch was won, but as Isaiah allowed himself to be helped toward the house, he knew that the most important victory was the one unfolding in his heart, the realization that the frontier wasn't about surviving alone, but finding someone worth surviving for. The summer sun bathed the ranch in golden light as Isaiah stood on the newly rebuilt porch. 2 months had passed since Burrow's attack. The physical wounds had healed faster than the land. Bullet holes in the barn's siding remained visible, and part of the corral was still under repair. But life had settled into a new rhythm, one that Isaiah found himself embracing rather than resisting. Jasper Burrows now resided in the territorial prison, convicted of attempted murder and kidnapping. His surviving men had scattered to the winds, and Sheriff Hewitt assured them that Tessa's troubles were behind her. Her uncle's death had indeed left her legally free, though Isaiah suspected that even if it hadn't, she would never again allow herself to be claimed as property. "Penny for your thoughts." Tessa's voice broke through his reverie as she joined him on the porch. She wore a simple dress of sky blue cotton, her brown hair pulled back with a ribbon that matched. 2 months of regular meals and freedom from fear had brought a healthy glow to her cheeks and a lightness to her movements that made Isaiah's heart skip when she entered a room. "Just thinking about how much has changed," he answered honestly. She followed his gaze across the ranch. "For the better, I hope?" "Definitely for the better," he agreed, turning to face her fully. "Though I never expected to have so many people around all the time." Tessa laughed softly. In the aftermath of the battle, 3 families from the nearby valley had offered help rebuilding. They'd brought food and labor, staying for days at a time until the worst of the damage was repaired. What had begun as neighborly assistance had evolved into regular Sunday dinners and community barn dances held in Isaiah's newly reinforced barn. "You've created something remarkable here," she said. "Not just a ranch, but a gathering place. A community." "We created it," he corrected her. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't stumbled into my barn that night." The memory hung between them. How close they'd come to never meeting. How easily their paths might have missed each other in the vastness of the frontier. Isaiah had thought about it often during his recovery. How a simple decision to check his barn that evening had altered the course of his life entirely. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, suddenly nervous despite having rehearsed the words countless times. Tessa tilted her head, curiosity evident in her expression. "What is it?" Isaiah reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the small object he'd carried there for days, waiting for the right moment. "Remember when I asked if you would stay? Before the fight?" "I remember," she said softly. "I told you to ask me again after we won." "Well, we won." He withdrew his hand from his pocket, revealing a small brass key resting on his palm. "This is the key to the ranch house. To our home, if you want it to be." His heart hammered against his ribs as he continued. "I'm asking you to stay, Tessa. Not as my cook or housekeeper, but as my wife." Tessa's eyes widened, her gaze moving from the key to his face. "Isaiah, I know it hasn't been that long," he hurried on. "But the frontier doesn't give us the luxury of time. Life is short and often hard out here. I've learned that the hard way." He took a deep breath. "I used to think that meant I had to face it alone. But loving you has taught me that's exactly backward. We're stronger together, Tessa. Happier together." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Are you certain? Once you give me the keys to your ranch, There's no taking them back. I've never been more certain of anything, Isaiah replied, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. I love you, Tessa Dalton. Will you marry me? Her answer came not in words, but in action as she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her hand covered his, accepting the key and everything it represented. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, I will marry you, Isaiah Porter. Their kiss spoke of promises kept and a future unfolding before them, a future neither had dared to imagine when they first met. When they finally parted, Isaiah kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. There's something else, he said. I've been thinking about changing the ranch name. Porter Ranch doesn't quite capture what this place has become. What did you have in mind? Tessa asked, her hands resting comfortably on his chest. Home Haven, he suggested. Because that's what you've made it for me. A true haven, not just a place to survive. Tessa considered the name, then nodded approval. Home Haven it is. Her smile turned mischievous. And when shall we make it official? The name and the marriage. How about the Harvest Festival next month? Isaiah proposed. The whole valley will be here anyway. Might as well give them something to celebrate besides corn and pumpkins. Laughter bubbled from Tessa, bright and joyful. A wedding at harvest. It feels right, reaping what we've sown. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Isaiah held the woman who had transformed his solitary existence into something rich and meaningful. Together they watched as ranch hands drove cattle in from distant pastures, as neighbors rode up the long drive bringing supplies for the week's barn raising, as life unfolded around them in all its complicated glory. The frontier would always be challenging. Harsh winters, unpredictable droughts, the constant work of taming wilderness. But Isaiah Porter no longer feared what it might take from him. Instead, he marveled at what it had given him. A brave woman who had stumbled into his barn one stormy night and, in doing so, had given him the keys not just to his ranch, but to his heart. 3 months later, as autumn painted the landscape in russet and gold, Isaiah and Tessa exchanged vows before the gathered community of Cottonwood Valley. Their wedding feast stretched long into the evening, with music and dancing continuing until the stars emerged in full brilliance above Home Haven Ranch. That night, as they stood on the porch of the house that was now truly theirs together, Tessa leaned into her husband's embrace. Do you ever think about how different things might have been if you hadn't found me that night? She asked quietly. Isaiah's arms tightened around her. I don't believe I found you, he replied, his voice tender in the darkness. I believe you found me. I was just waiting, though I didn't know it. Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the Wyoming sky, a frontier miracle in a land that demanded much but, occasionally, gave back everything one's heart could desire.